Mhm. Okay, so you saw some paintings from John Sargent, and you saw some paintings about Child Hassan. You saw that tiny brush stroke, those cut sharp brush strokes that lay on top of each other or next to each other. They don't blend in and make a color. They're just there. This is very reminiscent of the way Impressionists painted. Also, as the docent was telling us, this is also when you choose different site. So Child Hassan is known as the Impressionist who studied in Europe and learned his technique there, just like all of the others, Sargent, Whistler, Mary Cassatt. And he really focuses on the way light plays in all of his paintings. And we talk about the colors they use. In the last painting that we looked at on the video, we saw sort of muted colors, almost as if a fog had descended on the landscape. It was there, we saw a sunset, but then we saw kind of like a misty look to it. The watercolor that we saw done by Sargent had an interesting technique. In the watercolor, you still see the light pencil outline as he then fills it in with the watercolors. So he provides a quick sketch, and then he uses his watercolors, which are transparent and light and soft in color, to depict his subject, something that's very important. And he did take criticism about that, using that pencil technique as well. I want you to think of some vocabulary that might come up in the next few videos or in the rest of the lecture. Expressive brushstrokes, right? So they're tiny, they make a real dot, they bring your eye focused right in. They're very expressive. And like we think sometimes of something like Starry Night, which is not, that's Vincent van Gogh, but with his lines as he paints that picture, those lines draw you into the Starry Night. The same thing comes to the American Impressionists. Remember, they've studied abroad with the masters. We just heard studying with Monet. All of the masters in Europe study with these Americans so that they can perfect their artwork. Okay, again, the brush strokes make the viewer feel the picture. The edges are sharp and distinct. And then we also see sometimes the ragged textural items on there as well, like in the landscape, okay? One of the things that I want to talk to you about as far as Hassan is that he's thought of as the American Monet. And first of all, he studied with Monet in France, but he picks up much of the technique that comes from Monet as he paints beside him, as he dates Monet's daughter. So instead of being in a formal school situation, he's learning the colors. He's learning the brush strokes. He's not swimming, I'm sorry. He's learning all of those things from a great master, and that's how he pulls his things together. He uses something called broken brush strokes, which is what I've been describing. He also worked with other artists like Mary Cassatt and John Henry Thwaites. And during his time, he produced over 3,000 paintings in oils and watercolors. So that's quite a bit, okay? And he also did etchings. And in the beginning, he had very little training. He was talented in the arts, but his parents did not recognize his abilities. They just thought that's nice. They were hardworking people, and art was not really a way to make money back then. So they didn't really pay attention. Um, but he kept working on it. And after he left high school, and he had to leave high school before he finished it because they needed money, he started to study wood engraving, cutting into blocks of wood and then having them put ink on it with a roller and it going through a press, pressing it down and making a picture or an engraving. All right. Now, this was done quite a bit back when he was young because that's how they would do pictures in a newspaper. All right. They didn't use a photograph at that time. In that time, they used an engraving. Or if you had letterhead, like the name of your school or the name of your printing business, and you wanted that done on stationery so that you could do it and send it out, he would do a carving for that. And he made quite a bit of money. I mean, he got by with that. And then that brought him to painting in watercolors. And Child decides that he's going to focus on outdoor studies. And he does. And he's en plein air. And I don't remember if I told you about en plein air, but that means out in the fresh air, outside. So he's choosing studies that he sees around him. All right. Now, when we talked last week about national parks, they were working en plein air, they were outside doing those kind of settings, but he's now looking at the settings around him. And so he begins around 1879 and he starts to create his earliest oil paintings. And he also at this time is illustrating children's books because this is another way to make money. Remembering that back then, unless you were commissioned by a wealthy person, you really were not making a lot of money as an artist. So then when he started to do some other works, he had a friend that was an artist that was traveling to Europe, and his friend suggested that since he didn't have much formal training, that he should accompany him in Europe and study with him so that he could learn a little bit more. And by the 1880s, he began painting cityscapes, meaning areas in the city where he might walk or see at a park, or as he goes out of his front door, cityscapes. And he's very fascinated with that. He's depicting what he sees outside in his painting. And the thought was to look around you and paint what you see. By 1887, okay, Hassam is painting using freer brushstrokes because he's worked with his friend and softer scenes, all right? And he's starting to copy the French Impressionist way because he's studying in Europe and he stays there for a long time. And he becomes known as a group of American artists who are the 10 American artists who are mastering, all right, who are mastering Impressionist technique and theory. In the 1890s, okay, his techniques move even deeper into Impressionist art, choosing topics that would be those of an Impressionist painter, like the street scenes or scenes with horses. He loved to paint horses and he loved to paint street scenes. And you see that in much of his work. He continued to paint his scenes. And when he returned to the United States, he lived in New York. And he said that New York was the most beautiful place in the world, better than Paris. And he really enjoyed painting that. So we're going to see two videos. One, we're going to see about Child, okay, Child Hassam, and also one about these brushstrokes and how they're done and why they're used in Impressionist art. So take a look at these two recordings and then I'll be back with you and we'll talk about another artist.